Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question about appetite and willpower. And he's like, look, Jason, you talk a lot about appetite, a lot of factors involved with people's appetites, but what about willpower? You know, I crave pizza sometimes, but seen pizza, craved it, walked past it, and kept going. So what about willpower? And that's a deeper conversation. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that. Now, you can tell usually when people say things like this, they have never been morbidly obese. They don't actually understand that when we're talking about morbid obesity, we're usually talking about a set of genetic factors involved with things like leptin and ghrelin, which control appetite and things in the brain. We're talking about food addictions. We're talking about people who are predisposed to addictions genetically. And we're sometimes talking about unhealthy relationships with food that are part of deeper psychological issues. And this is something I am very qualified to speak on from personal experience because I have all of these factors involved, me personally. And I'll give you an example, and we'll talk a little bit about food addiction here. For example, for me, I have to be very careful with trigger foods. I have foods that if I eat like pizza, for example, if you hand me a slice of pizza and there's a whole large pizza sitting there, if I eat one piece of pizza and I wasn't hungry, I will get hungry. If I eat another piece of pizza, I'm going to become so insanely hungry that it's going to take every bit of willpower I have to not eat the whole pizza. And that's if I started not hungry at all. So for me, if I don't want to eat a whole pizza, I can't be sitting in a room with a whole pizza and have a slice. That's just the way it is. And I accept that. So I accept that I just don't get to go around eating pizza just because I want a piece. Now you'll say, well, that's willpower, but that's willpower up to a point. Now, me personally, let's talk about predisposition to addiction. I have multiple alcoholics in my family. Several of my close family members are alcoholics. I am predisposed to addiction genetically. All right, as far as morbid obesity, leptin and ghrelin, my father's family, I have multiple cousins, aunts, and uncles who are in excess of 300 pounds. Now, not counting the one who was in the NFL because he got to like 310 at that point, but he's down in the 200s now while being like 6'4". So he doesn't quite count, but his brother is 350 pounds. His little brother's 350 pounds. So there's a genetic predisposition in my family to overeat. It's not slow metabolism. We eat too damn much. We get really hungry. I am personally a victim of childhood abuse. I'm a childhood abuse survivor. That will predispose you to having various addictions. It can cause a lot of deep-seated problems, things that I personally have had to come to terms with. And being aware of that helps. Being aware of those factors helps me in trying to deal with it the best I can. And I know that for me, my best option is generally abstinence of foods that are going to be trigger foods for my appetite. Foods that are going to be triggers for food addiction for me. I can occasionally have a little bit if I filled myself up on salad or something first. Like if I've gone and eaten at a Jason salad buffet, which you guys see me post on Instagram, I had 3 big-ass salads, then I can get away with a scoop of ice cream. Then I can get away with a slice of pizza, but only because I have filled myself to the point to where if I were to try to eat a whole pizza, I would throw up. I wouldn't physically be able to get it in. My stomach is full of salad and empty, and just like almost calorie-free, fibrous vegetables. All right, that's a viable strategy. But if I were to be hungry and walk in and eat a slice of pizza, it's not going to work. But I know that about myself. So people say, well, what about willpower? Let me ask you a question. Do you really think willpower exists outside of your brain and the chemistry in there? Do you really think that it does? Because I don't think that it does. I don't think that human beings have an external off-site source out in the cosmos for their willpower. I think your willpower is involved with your brain chemistry. My opinion, if you think I'm wrong, feel free to provide some evidence. When we're talking about food addictions, we are talking about brain chemistry. And what we have found is that there are foods that for people who are genetically predisposed to addiction, you can become addicted to them. Sugar is one of them. Really high fatty foods can be others. Foods that are, really salty and fatty can be other ones, like pizza. Perfect example. But sugars definitely, they can have a drug-like effect. Now, does that mean everyone who eats sugar is going to become a sugar addict? Of course not. If you're genetically predisposed to addiction, it might. And again, that's going to make it hard for you to stop. And what we have found in studies is that people who are addicted to sugar or have a predisposition to addiction, meaning they have a different dopamine response in the brain. That's what's going on with drug addicts. The most simple explanation, if you guys saw the South Park episode in it, with Satan explaining all of that, I think it was to Kyle or whatever, that was a beautiful scientific explanation of how addiction works. So if someone can find that episode of South Park and link it under, that would be great. But that's what you're dealing with. You are dealing with a dopamine response in the brain. And what happens is that when people eat a bunch of sugary foods, highly refined sugars, or even a small amount, when we've done studies, people who have that dopamine issue in their brain, which is, again, people who are predisposed to addiction have that problem in general. If you're genetically predisposed to it, there's addicts and things in your family, you probably have that genetic trait. If you have that trait when you're given these highly refined foods, what do they find happens? You get hungrier at your next meal. You eat more calories than if you had not eaten anything at all. Meaning if you go eat a sugary food like that, and then the next meal you eat, you're going to eat more calories. You're going to automatically eat more calories. You're going to have a lower satiety from the next meal you eat. It's going to make you crave more food. It's going to make you hungrier. So not only will you eat more food at the next meal, but you have already eaten the higher calorie sugary foods. Therefore, it's just going to predispose you to overeating. And it's not going to be willpower. It's going to be mindless overeating. You're going to sit down and eat and just eat more food if you've got more available. That's what happens. Interesting response in the brain. And so when you say, well, can't they just not eat more food? That's like telling a heroin addict, can he only inject a third of the syringe? Is he capable of stopping? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But once he's addicted, he's got that syringe in his hand. Do you really think he can moderate his heroin when he's got the whole syringe sitting there in front of him? It's going to be very difficult. He can't just have a little bit. Same thing with an alcoholic. Take someone who's a serious alcoholic. They have an addiction. You hand them a bottle of whiskey and pour one shot and slide them that shot glass over. How hard is it for them? How much willpower do they need to take just one shot and look at the bottle and stop? We can argue about willpower a lot, but when it comes to addictions, that's our problem. And we are dealing with food addictions, and we live in a society where addictive foods are everywhere. Our foods today are highly refined, and we know that highly refined foods tend to be more addictive and they have less satiety. For people who are prone to addiction, people with a genetic predisposition of it, people with a history of childhood abuse, these are the people who are predisposed to become addicts. Different groups of people like that. They're given these addictive foods also. There's going to be a tendency to overeat. Right? Highly refined foods. We make foods in such a way now that they're actually appetite stimulators. We put so much salt in all our foods. What does salt do? Salt makes you thirsty, but if you don't immediately drink when you're thirsty from salty foods, what happens? You think that you're hungry, but you're actually thirsty, but it makes you and tricks you into thinking you're actually hungry when water itself would actually relieve the hunger issue you get from the salty foods. But it convinces you that you're hungry. In the meantime, you need something in your stomach. It's really your brain trying to tell you to drink something, but that is a response. We have all this salt in all of our foods, MSGs in all of our foods, flavor enhancers in our foods. These flavor enhancers increase appetite. They cause people to eat more. I mean, that's great if you're the company selling these products, because people are going to buy more of your products because they're going to want to eat more. Not so good for the individual. Now, you combine that in a world where we don't exercise enough, we don't get around and move around enough, and people wonder why we have an obesity problem. Well, it's a combination of factors. Now, it's pretty easy to say, well, willpower, get your ass to the gym, get up and exercise. Well, that's a legitimate point. That's a legitimate point about willpower. That's just being lazy. That's part of it, but that's not the entire picture. We have an obesity epidemic because we are surrounded by foods all the time that are the type of foods that trigger addiction, highly refined foods, combinations of fatty, salty foods. All right, that's a big one for addiction. Sugary foods, a lot of refined sugars. That tends to be addictive in the brain. Those are the sort of foods that people form addictions to very, very easily for people who are predisposed to addiction. Well, you look at the amount of alcoholism and drug abuse and everything we have in society, and it's pretty obvious a lot of people are predisposed to addiction. All right, you look at all the childhood abuse that goes on and other things that set people up for certain problems later in life. It's pretty obvious we have a lot of these problems out there. With all of these things going on, it's no wonder that people develop food addictions. What's the right answer to that? I don't know. I don't think we necessarily need to come in and regulate businesses and tell them what they can and can't sell. But what we do need to have is education. Yeah, we have to push exercise. We have to push that, but it takes more than that. That's one element of it. The other thing that we've got to address is teaching people to make better food choices. It's teaching people that moderation doesn't work for a lot of people. Moderation doesn't work for people who have food addictions. It doesn't work for addicts. Moderation doesn't work for alcoholics. Moderation doesn't work for heroin addicts. Moderation is not going to work. So when you have all these if it fits your macros people, these really skinny fuckers who struggle to gain weight, who can cut on Pop-Tarts, that's not going to fly for people who have been obese at any point. People who suffer from food addiction, sugar addictions, coming in and eating 300 calories of Pop-Tart while trying to maintain a 2,200 calorie diet to lose weight, best of fucking luck with that. It's this whole concept of moderation that's the problem. It's because, yeah, moderation works if you can follow it. It absolutely works. Works beautifully. You can't get an addict to moderate. You can't make an addict moderate. Addicts can't moderate things they are addicted to. That's why they're called addicts. That's the difference between someone who drinks one drink a day versus an alcoholic. Because a person who drinks one drink a day can stop at one because they're not addicted. The addict doesn't have that ability. So when you look at it in that perspective, we have to teach people that when they have trigger foods, they have to avoid those things. They have to avoid those things. The only exception might be special occasions, maybe a holiday feast. And hopefully they have gone ahead and done some exercise first so that they create a calorie deficit. Hopefully they filled themselves up with vegetables first so that their stomach doesn't have enough space for them to overgorge on this junk. And if they do that, they'll probably be okay. But teaching people that most of the time, the foods that they know that they are going to overeat, whether it's sugary foods, whether it's ice cream, whether it's pizza, whatever your trigger foods happen to be, the foods that you struggle to control your intake of, they simply have to abstain from those foods. And it's not about willpower. You can say, well, it's willpower to abstain to a certain point. But people will try to say it's willpower to moderate them. It really isn't, not for the food addict. They simply have to avoid those things. And that's things they have to accept. That's something I have to do. Even for me, I mean, I used to even like to do pizza on cheat days, but I haven't had pizza in months now. It's been many, many months since I've had pizza because I know personally that I'm going to overeat that food if I happen to consume it. I love it. It's delicious. I'm probably addicted to it. So I avoid it. Every time I walk by pizza in the grocery store, I stop and look at it. Every time I drive by CC's Pizza, I look at it and I think, man, it would be really nice to eat some CC's. But then I go, but I know I'm going to gain 6-7 pounds of water weight when I go there and I'm going to feel like shit the rest of the day. So how about I not do that? And that's kind of the point, but I still notice it every time. And that's the thing. That's how you know you probably got a food addiction to something. When you notice it every time you pass by it. Yeah, that's a food addiction. And the only way that you can deal with an addiction is abstinence. And it's just that simple. It's not even an issue of willpower because you're not going to have willpower once you get a taste of it. So what people have to be taught is, yeah, they've got to be taught proper nutrition. They have to be taught exercise. But when we are dealing in a society, we're dealing with food addiction and we're dealing with people surrounded by highly refined foods all the time. Foods that it is very easy to overeat, very easy to develop addictions to. We have to teach those people that, look, your food addictions, your binge foods, you have to avoid those things. You've got to learn to give them up. You have to learn to give them up. And if you can't, you're going to struggle with your weight indefinitely. And there's just no way around it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. And I will talk to you guys next time.